So today is a very auspicious day. It's the beginning of Hanukkah, which is a Jewish observance. I'm not Jewish, so I'm not going to go too deeply into that tradition, but it's basically about good miraculously overcoming evil, which is a common theme for observances this time of year. And during the 8 days of Hanukkah, candles are lighted, and the first one tonight. And gifts are exchanged, and special foods eaten, and all that kind of thing. So Judaism follows its own calendar. So Hanukkah moves around relative to Christmas. It generally comes around this time of year. And so it happens that it fell on Yule this year, which is kind of neat. So at Stetson, we officially start off the holiday season with a Yule log lighting. And it's become increasingly interfaith in recent years. We invite students from different religious organizations to do some readings, and then we all sing together. And the readings that we've done this morning all came from this year's Yule log lighting. So most of those were written by students in previous years. The timing of our Yule log lighting, by the way, has to do with the scheduling of final exams. So be happy that you don't have to take a final exam tomorrow. The president of the university's Hillel chapter, the Jewish student organization, started off the readings this year by talking about Hanukkah in the context of the Yule log, which is very interesting. And I want to share a few of her remarks with you. She said, the word Hanukkah translates as festival of lights. We celebrate light as a miracle, and throughout Jewish history, we have thanked God for this gift. When the tradition of the Yule log was first explained to me, I didn't quite catch the true meaning of the ritual. So I did some research and found that it was originally meant to last through the 12 days of Christmas, to keep the household warm and provide light through the holidays. And this is not very different from the rituals of the Jewish Festival of Lights, where we add more light each day of the holiday to thank God for providing us with warmth and vision during both trying times and times of celebration. With all of the light that glows throughout this time of year, we are reminded what is most important in life and during this season: togetherness, celebration, and love. So usually this time of year, somebody will ask me if I celebrate Christmas, and Michelle and I do, although for us it's more of a cultural holiday than a religious one. But for a lot of people, Christmas is kind of part of the cultural DNA. Doesn't necessarily have to be Christmas or associated with Christianity, but this time of year is spiritually significant, I think, in our culture, regardless of what religion you associate it with. Yule log, for instance, probably originated with German and Norse paganism, but virtually every culture has some observance of the coming of light to the darkness, the overcoming of evil by goodness, the celebration of new life, regarding replacing the old as the seasons change. The dates often commemorate a starting point of some kind: the birth of Jesus, the reconstruction of a temple in Jewish religious faith, the birth of Muhammad, or the Buddha's awakening. So even though I no longer identify as Christian, I find teachings in it. And you know, the founder of Soto Zen, Dogen, once wrote that once you've found your teacher, in other words, once you have set yourself on the spiritual path, then you should seek teachings everywhere. He wrote, thus you should request the teachings from trees and rocks. You should seek the teachings in the fields and villages. You should put your questions to a pillar and practice intensively with a wall. So if that's the case, then why not request teachings from a Christmas tree or a Yule log? Seems to me that those could offer teachings also. So the president of Stetson's Asian Pacific American Coalition, which is, she happens to be Vietnamese and Buddhist, she read one of my favorite Buddhist stories at our Yule log lighting this year. A Buddhist scholar named Te Shan had spent years studying the Diamond Sutra, one of the key scriptures of Mahayana Buddhism. And he heard that there was a new school of Buddhist thought called Chan, which is Chinese for Zen. And it said that the Dharma could be realized outside of the sutras. And he felt this was wrong, heretical. And he set out to northern China to straighten out these misguided Chan monks. So as he entered a village near a monastery headed by Chan Master Long Tan, he decided that he would stop for refreshments. And an old woman there served him tea, and she noticed that he was carrying a heavy bag. And she said, "What are you carrying so heavily in that bag?" Taishan replied, "This is the commentaries that I have made on the Diamond Sutra through many, many years of diligent work." Well, this old woman happened to be a student of the Chan Master up there at Long Tan's monastery, and she said to Taishan, "I've read that sutra. It says the past mind cannot be held, the present mind cannot be held, the future mind cannot be held. You've asked for tea and refreshments. Which mind are you going to refresh?" Well, this question left him flabbergasted. And so he asked this woman, says, "Do you know of a good teacher around here?" So she gave him directions to Long Tan's monastery, which was not more than just a few miles away. And so he went, now somewhat humbled by the teaching that he received from this woman, quite different than when he had started out on this journey. And so he got there and he spoke to the master and he asked many, many questions. And Long Tan was very generous with his answers, and they talked deep into the night. And finally the teacher said, "You know, the night is getting old. Why don't you retire and why don't you just stay here?" So Taishan bowed and he opened the screen to go out and observed it's very dark outside. Long Tan opened him a lighted candle to find his way. But just as they stepped into the darkness, the master leaned over and blew it out. And at that moment, as he was plunged into darkness, Taishan was enlightened. He had realized at that point that scriptures and teachings were not truths. They were ways to awaken to one's own wisdom. They weren't wisdom itself. One can't truly realize the truth if it is simply handed to you by someone else, the way Long Tan handed him the candle. To truly realize the heart of a religious teaching, one must embody it oneself. So the next day, Taishan came to the front of the lecture hall and he burned his commentaries on the Diamond Sutra. And he said, however profound the teachings are in comparison with enlightenment, they are like a single hair to the great sky. However profound the complicated knowledge of the world, compared to awakening, it is like a drop of water to the great ocean. So this story represents the need to take the light from others and make it our own, to incorporate the wisdom we receive from our religious traditions and from ritual and embody it into our actions. So we close Yule log lighting with a comment from one of the chaplains, me. And so I point out that as human beings living on the earth, we recognize that light is essential to our existence. It makes it possible for plants to provide food and make oxygen for us to breathe. Light awakens our minds and our hearts. It illuminates our world so that we can see clearly. And the coming of light into the darkness reminds us of the cycles of life that we all experience. So it makes sense that the world's cultures seem to universally celebrate the coming of light into our lives at times of darkness. So in my tradition, the spiritual life is embodied in the concept of enlightenment, the light of truth illuminating our hearts. And Japanese Buddhists celebrate Bodhi Day this time of year, commemorating the Buddha's enlightenment. And a lot of us greet one another, as I did when I started talking, with Namo Amida Butsu, acknowledging the oneness with Amitabha, the Buddha of infinite light. So we recognize the coming of light into our hearts by bringing the light of the Yule log, of the candles, of the lights on the Christmas tree into the darkness of the evening. So as our Yule log burned there at Stetson, we gathered around and enjoyed its warmth, and then everyone took a sprig of holly, which we had given to people as they came in, and added them to the fire. And as we do that, we commit any misdeeds, regrets, or hindrances from the past year to the flames, letting them go so that we can make a fresh start. And then we have them light candles, and that take them with them as they go over toward where the coffee and hot cocoa is. But symbolizing the light spreading through the world from the source of the assembly. It's a beautiful ceremony, and we leave behind the errors of the past while we take the light of our newfound wisdom and the warmth of our love with us to spread it through the world.